Machiavelli called it the most dangerous mind on earth, the mind that has eliminated the option of failure from its own psychology, not through motivation, not through discipline alone, but through a single psychological shift that rewires how a person relates to their own potential, the shift from want to must. Most people live their entire lives in the language of want. I want to be disciplined, I want to be successful, I want to change. And want is a comfortable word. Want leaves the door open for failure without consequence. Want does not demand anything from you. Want is the language of the person who has already accepted that it might not happen. Must is different. Must closes the door. Must removes the exit. Must turns the psychological architecture of your mind into a single corridor, pointing in one direction, forward. The dangerous ones, the ones history remembers, the ones who built empires and mastered themselves in ways that defied ordinary logic. They did not operate in want, they operated in must, and that single shift in mental language rewired everything about how they moved through the world. What you are about to hear is a psychological map, a Machiavellian framework for understanding why some minds perform at levels that seem almost inhuman, why they do not break under pressure, why they do not need external conditions to align before they act. The people who find this content do not find it by accident. By the end of this video, you will understand the exact psychological mechanism that separates people who perform at elite levels from people who understand everything about performance but cannot make themselves do it. You will understand why willpower is a myth built for people who never discovered something more powerful. You will understand how Machiavelli, centuries before modern psychology existed, already understood the architecture of the committed mind. Stay until the end. The person operating from genuine necessity does not need the morning to feel right. They do not need their emotions to cooperate. Because in the architecture of their psychology, the outcome is not a goal, it is a requirement. And you do not negotiate with requirements. Let's begin. Law 1. The elimination of choice. Understand what choice does to the committed mind. Choice is not freedom. For the person who has a vision and a direction they have already decided is non-negotiable, choice is weight. Choice is the daily cost of reconsidering what you already decided. Every morning you wake up and choose whether to do the thing you said you would do. You are burning psychological energy on a decision that should have already been made permanently. Smart minds do not choose every day. They decide once. Then they execute indefinitely. Machiavelli wrote that the prince who does not risk everything has already lost something he cannot recover. He was not speaking only about military strategy. He was speaking about psychological architecture. The person who holds something back, the person who keeps one foot on safer ground, they have already told their own mind that they are not fully committed, and the mind responds to that signal by never fully committing. The principle is brutal in its simplicity. Every decision you force yourself to remake daily is a decision you have not truly made. Real commitment is the elimination of the question. When you have genuinely installed the must mindset, the question of whether you will do the work does not arise. It was already answered. What remains is only the execution. Average minds make the same decision 47 times and call it consistency. The must mind makes it once and calls it settled. Power does not live in the person who keeps deciding to stay. Power lives in the person for whom leaving was never a real option to begin with. Law 2. Necessity as intelligence. Most people will never understand this about the high performers they admire. Those people are not necessarily more talented. Many of them are not even more intelligent in the conventional sense. What they have that most people lack is the ability to manufacture genuine necessity where none externally exists. Most people wait for necessity to arrive from the outside. The deadline appears and they perform. The crisis hits and they activate. The consequences become real and they move. This is reactive intelligence. Strategic minds manufacture necessity in advance. They do not wait for external pressure. They create the internal equivalent before the external version arrives. They build the psychological reality of must inside themselves before the world builds it for them. Machiavelli's fundamental insight about power was not about domination. It was about preparation. The leader who acts before circumstances demand it commands circumstances. The leader who waits for circumstances to demand action is always behind, always reactive, always at the mercy of events rather than the architect of them. The must mindset makes you the architect. When you install genuine necessity into your psychology before the world installs it by force, you are operating from a position of power that reactive people cannot access. You are not managing a crisis. You are executing a plan. And there is an enormous psychological difference between those two states. Weak minds outsource their necessity to external pressure and call it responsiveness. Dangerous minds install necessity internally and call it discipline. Law 3. The psychology of the burned bridge. In 1519, Hernán Cortés landed in Mexico with 600 men, vastly outnumbered, unknown territory, catastrophic odds, and then he ordered his ships burned. When Cortés burned the ships, he did not just remove the physical option of retreat, he removed the cognitive option. His men could not retreat, and because they could not, they stopped imagining retreat. And because they stopped imagining it, they stopped spending psychological energy on it. Every ounce of cognitive resource was redirected into a single direction: forward. This is one of the most powerful and most terrifying principles in the psychology of commitment. The burned bridge is not a symbol of stubbornness. It is a tool of psychological engineering. When you remove the route back, you do not become reckless. You become singular. And singular focus at high intensity is among the rarest and most powerful states a human mind can enter. Modern culture tells you to keep options open, to have backup plans, to hedge. But for the person who is certain about their direction, every backup plan is a psychological tax. Every kept option is a whisper from the part of your mind still negotiating with the outcome. The must mind does not whisper. It has already decided. The tactic is not to be reckless with your external circumstances. The point is to find the internal bridges you are still keeping. The private permission structures that allow you a graceful exit if things get hard. The quiet self-agreements that say if it does not work by a certain point, you are allowed to stop. Find those agreements, examine them with clarity, and then make a final decision about whether you are actually committed or whether you are performing commitment while quietly maintaining the possibility of retreat. What the average person calls having options, the must mind recognizes as undecided goals dressed in strategic language. Law 4. Emotional detachment from the process. Here is the paradox that destroys more potentially great people than any external obstacle ever could. They are emotionally attached to the process of becoming what they want to be. They need the work to feel meaningful in the moment they are doing it. They need inspiration present before they begin, and because they need to feel good about the process, they are dependent on the process feeling good before they can engage with it. The must mind has severed that attachment entirely, not because high performers feel nothing. They feel everything. The fatigue is real. The doubt is real. The moments of profound psychological resistance are completely real. But they have decoupled the question of how the process feels from the question of whether the process continues. The process continues. That is not a decision that gets revisited based on emotional input. Emotion provides information. It does not provide permission. Marcus Aurelius did not write about how to feel motivated. He wrote about how to act in the complete absence of favorable feeling, because he understood that the mind capable of executing only when it feels like executing has surrendered its highest function to its lowest appetite. What average people call discipline is really just motivation in disguise. They feel like doing it today, and they do it, and they call that discipline. Real discipline is doing it specifically on the days when every emotional signal in your system is telling you not to. That is the test. That is where the must mind and the want mind produce completely different results. You do not earn the must mindset on easy days. You reveal it on hard ones. Feel everything. Be moved by nothing. Law 5. Identity before behavior. This is the most important law in this entire video, and it is the one most people reverse. Most people try to change their behavior and hope the identity follows. The must mind builds the identity first and allows behavior to become an expression of it. The person trying to become disciplined asks themselves every day whether they will do the disciplined thing. They are approaching discipline as a performance. Every day requires new effort to produce the same action, because the identity has not been set. The must mind does not perform discipline. They are a disciplined person. The behavior is not something they do. It is an expression of something they are. When your identity is set at the level of character rather than behavior, the question is never whether you will act in accordance with your values. The question is only when and how. Because acting against your established identity does not feel like a bad day. It feels like self-betrayal, and the psychological cost of self-betrayal is high enough that the mind begins actively avoiding it. Stop asking what you need to do to achieve your goal. Start asking who you need to become, so that achieving your goal is a natural consequence of who you are. The person who says, "I am working toward being disciplined," is always working. The person who says, "I am someone who executes regardless of feeling," is already there. Average people change what they do and wonder why they still feel the same. Strategic minds change who they are and watch behavior reorganize itself automatically. Behavior follows identity, always. Law 6. The non-negotiable internal standard. The must mindset is ultimately the product of a single decision made at the deepest level of personal philosophy. The decision that you have a standard from which there is no downward negotiation, not a goal, not an aspiration, a floor, a minimum, a line below which you have permanently decided you do not live. Most people operate with goals above them and no floor beneath them. They aim upward, and they have no protection against the slow erosion downward. Life applies pressure. The goal becomes harder to see. The upward aim gradually lowers. And because there is no floor, the erosion has nowhere to stop. The person who was aiming at excellence is now, years later, aiming at comfort. The must mind builds the floor first. Before the goal, before the vision, there is an internal standard that defines the minimum acceptable version of this person, and that standard is protected with a ferocity that has nothing to do with motivation. It has to do with identity, with dignity, with the private agreement this person has made about what kind of life they are willing to live. Machiavelli understood that a state without defended borders is not a state. It is territory waiting to be claimed by someone else's ambition. The person without a defended internal standard is not a sovereign. They are occupied territory, slowly colonized by other people's expectations, comfort, and the gravitational pull of ordinary. Define your floor right now, not your ceiling. Your floor. What is the minimum standard for how you use your time, build your mind, and move through the world that you are not willing to fall below under any circumstance? Install it at the identity level so completely that falling below it does not feel like a bad day. It feels like a violation of self. The must mindset does not need a goal to pursue. It needs a standard to protect. Most people have wishes above them. Dangerous people have standards beneath them that make falling backwards structurally impossible. Now let us pull back and look at what this video has built. 6 laws, each one a different angle on the same central architecture. The elimination of choice at the decision level, the manufacturing of necessity before the world imposes it. the burned bridge, and what happens when the psychological exit is removed, the detachment from emotional state as a condition of action, the primacy of identity over behavior, and the non-negotiable standard as the floor of a life lived at a different level. These are not 6 separate tools. They are 6 faces of a single psychological orientation. The orientation of the person who has decided their outcome is not a preference. It is a requirement. Here is the final reframe. You have been told your entire life that the secret to achievement is wanting it badly enough. That passion drives performance. That if you find what you love, the work will feel effortless. And the moment you need it to feel effortless is the moment you discover what the must mind never has to. The moment when the want is not there. The person operating on want experiences that moment as an obstacle. They look outward for the feeling to return. And while they look outward, the execution stops. The must mind experiences that moment as irrelevant data. The feeling is gone. Noted. The work continues, not because this person is numb, but because they have built their psychology on a foundation that does not require the feeling in order to produce the action. They have moved from a performance powered by inspiration to a life organized around necessity. And necessity does not check in with inspiration before it moves. You are watching this because some part of you already knows this. Some part of you has already felt the gap between what you are doing and what you know you are capable of. That gap does not close through motivation. It does not close through inspiration. It closes through a single decision made at a level of finality that most people never reach. The decision that this is not what I want, this is what I must. That the standard is not aspirational, it is structural. That the direction is not a goal I am pursuing, it is a requirement I am already fulfilling. That the question of whether I will do the work is no longer a question my mind is allowed to ask, because it was already answered permanently at the identity level, where it cannot be undone by a difficult morning or an uninspired afternoon or a season of results that have not yet reflected the effort. The world does not bend to desire. It bends to necessity, and the mind that understands this does not wait to become necessary. It decides to be. If this video reached something in you, drop must in the comments right now. Not as a motivational gesture, as a declaration, as a public marker of the moment the negotiation with yourself ended. Subscribe if you have not already. This channel is built for minds that are done waiting for the right conditions. The must mind does not perform ambition. It lives it. In silence, in execution, in the refusal to negotiate with anything less than what it knows it is capable of. That is what you are. Now move accordingly.